really you have two goals when you're making a pitch to an investment panel. That's really what this presentation is about, is that you've developed a pitch, or you should develop a pitch, and the purpose of it is to get money, right? Well, preliminarily, they're really just two simple goals. And one is to be remembered, and the other is to get to the next meeting. So the reason these are important is that investors, when they hold a screening, they invite you to come and do a pitch. There might be 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 presentations that day. And you can imagine, if you're in the investor's chair, they will struggle to remember names and what your business is about, right? So clearly being memorable is important. And also, the hope is that you get them interested enough that they would like to meet again, because that's these conversations, and that's plural, can go on for weeks and weeks and weeks with investors as they go through their due diligence process. So it begs the question, well, who's in the audience? And usually you're going to know in advance based upon the type of group that you're presenting with. So generally speaking, today's presentation is going to focus in on the angel investors, and I can talk a little about the differences between these groups. So seed investors usually invest at pre-revenue, pre-prototype, or MVP, as we like to call it. And they'll take a larger percentage of equity. It's a much higher risk investment. And so there are seed investment firms, there are individual seed investors, but it's a little blurry out there of when someone is an angel investor. So an angel investor has a similar profile. And my experience says the angel investors are a little bit further down the track. They tend to be more conservative than most of us think they are. And they're looking for startups that are making the transition into companies. So a startup is looking for a customer, trying to figure out how they're going to make money with it and how to solve that problem. Whereas a company knows the customer, has figured out the problem, has come out with a solution, and is beginning the sales process. So that juncture is the sweet spot for most of the angel investors. Private equity is similar money, tends to come in later stage, tends to be where an angel investor can be an individual or a member of a network or a fund. Private equity are like little partnerships or big partnerships that take usually other people's money, and they'll look to typically acquire startups or small companies, usually companies. And in fact, they might take 2, 3, 4 of those companies and do what's called a roll-up. And the intent is to buy low and sell high. So if they can get an aggressive price on the acquisition of these 2, 3, 4 companies, they roll them up into one. They put lipstick on, dress them up, and a year and a half later, they attempt to sell them. That's a very common private equity approach. Venture capitalists tend to be professional investors. They're investing other people's money. Typically, they'll come in after the angel investors. The methodology is simpler. They just have more zeros. They have more money, and they're looking for the best of the best. And then meanwhile, you got your bankers out there, and they will enjoy the chance to get to know you when you're a startup, but don't look for them to lend you money, because they lend money to companies. companies that are up and running, that have profits, revenue, that are in business. So typically you're just, as a startup, you're too early for the bankers. So one of the questions is, well, who are these people? Who are these angel investors? And a little bit of research says, well, there's a profile out there. Overwhelmingly, they're men. Overwhelmingly, they're Caucasian. 55% of them have been startup CEOs, run their own companies. Surprisingly, many, most have a tech background. Well, the tech background actually folds to those three criteria above. About 30% of the angel investors in the US are in California, and Southern California has a very large number of angel investors. Venture capitalists, not so much. They're up in Silicon Valley. The average age of that angel investor is 57 years old. And yeah, they got money. They're high net worth individuals who made money through corporate life, through startup life, whatever it is. So isn't that an obvious profile of who you might be presenting to? Yes, it's rich old white guys, unequivocally. And it's changing. Women in the angel community are a growing segment. We have diversity in race and ethnicity, but angel investors and their money is the product of the last like 30, 40 years. So that's why this profile is so real. It's interesting, if you look at the angels, here's an interesting statistic, and it's misleading. 11% of angel portfolios have a positive exit. Okay, so 11%. And what's a positive exit? Well, it had some return. It doesn't mean that it broke even. It doesn't mean that it did well. But think about that for a second. 89% of the deals have a poor exit. There is no cash distribution. So wow, this is a risky business if you're an investor. And think about this: the exits, they can take 7 to 10 years. So we agree to invest in your company today as an angel group or fund. Boy, it's going to be a decade before we get our return. So remember, the return on investment is a function of a capital event. It's where the company goes public, which is like getting struck by lightning. A merger or an acquisition where the stock of the company is purchased, highly likely if there's a capital event, with the exception of a bankruptcy. So this is why the angel investor is looking for a 10 to 20 times return. So think about that. What they want to do is give you $1, or rather buy with $1 or some percentage of your company. And then they want to know that in 7 to 10 years, they're going to get $10 or $20 back in return. That's all they ask. Now, does that sound greedy? I suppose it does, but think about that stat. Most they're losing money. they're like throwing money away from their perspective on nearly 90% of their investments. So it is a risky business. And if you pick a winner, and in fact, for instance, for the fund I run, we have 31 investments in the fund. And of those 31 that we've invested in the last 6+ years, we've had 2 that have exited and through failure. The other 29 are alive, but the question becomes, which of those 29 are going to kill it and get the return for the fund. So if you do the math, if you have, in our case, 31 investments, if we have 3, maybe 4 that absolutely knock the ball out of the park, the fund is a winner. So that's how alarming those stats really are. I'd like to pause just for a second and talk about the soft skills in presentation. And today, if you present to an angel network or to a fund, it could very well be in person. It's just as likely that you're going to do it by Zoom. So the protocol is normally you make contact with someone at the group, the fund, the network, and they hear your maybe verbal pitch. Maybe you send an executive summary, and then they arrange what's called a pre-screen. So usually that is a presentation of a PowerPoint pitch, and it could be short. It could be as short as 5 minutes. More typically, it's up to 15. And then based upon that presentation, they ask you to go to a full screening. And then at that screening, there could be an audience of 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 people. I would say 20 is a normal number. And so there is kind of a courtship and some progressive disclosure about your business, whether it's face-to-face or if it's on Zoom. So look at it this way. If you're invited to pitch, these are busy people. Sometimes they're a little grumpy, by the way, and you got to be prepared to start right away, whether it's in person or on Zoom. Now, it would be nice if there's chance for what I call warm-up, and that's where you say hello, you shake hands, you hand out business cards, you talk about the Lakers, the Dodgers, things like that. And it is a mammalian experience. You're making eye contact. And honestly, you want to thank them for the opportunity to pitch. And then boom, you got to get started. One thing I want to talk about on Zoom, as well as in person, you want to think of yourself as like a newspaper reporter. You'll notice they're very careful with their hands. They're not moving them around. Know that your gestures will reinforce your message. So when you do use a hand gesture or something like that is powerful. But generally speaking, you want to keep your hands at your side and make as much eye contact as possible with your audience. 70% of communication is said to be nonverbal, and most of that is with eye contact. Can't emphasize enough the importance of it. And then with your voice, you want to vary the volume. You don't want to yell at them. You don't want to whisper, but you do want to change the tone. By the way, when people are nervous, many talk too fast. So you do need to slow yourself down and pause. You know, you're under the gun time limit wise, so there's a natural tendency to want to talk fast. You know, try to have some variation in your pitch, etc., in the pitch of your voice. And I would suggest you use real words. Avoid using words and phrases that only lawyers do or scientists. In other words, just talk like a human and it'll come across as more believable. By the way, what about jokes? I like a good joke as much as anybody, but it is so easy to offend people these days. So I would be very careful in terms of what funny stuff you might say. So normally you're given a time frame to present, and that means the audience listens politely, but not always. Sometimes they'll choose to disagree with you on the spot. And it begs the question, well, what do you do? Are you right? Are they right? Are you both right? Usually you want to thank them for your question. And if you can't answer it on the spot eloquently and completely, you take it as an action item. You don't want to get in an argument with a potential investor. And so if the panel interrupts you, in a way, it's kind of a good thing. They're listening to you. So I would let them, they're the ones with the money. So I would let them talk. Very frequently, you're making a presentation under a time limit. You forget to say something, maybe something important. Well, the good news in a presentation like this, in the Q&A period, you can actually say, oh, one thing I forgot to say was blah, blah, blah. And you go ahead and get it across because you will remember then. And then for the use of laser pointers, I discourage them. This is a live presentation because most of us are not accustomed to using them and they end up being lightsabers. So don't do that. In terms of types of presentations, one of the worst things you can do is bury a slide with text. People will look forward, they'll struggle to read it, and there won't be enough time to read it. So just don't do it. And if you had a complex slide, you don't read it yourself. You might talk about it and interpret it. But generally, a presentation with a lot of text, bad idea. Steve Jobs was an incredible presenter. And if you've seen the movies or footage of him talking, he'll be on stage, he'll have a microphone, and there'll be a huge image behind him of an Apple or an iPhone or something. And boy, did it really work for him. But if you had his PowerPoint after he talked, you'd be saying, well, what did he say? Because most of us are not as eloquent as Steve Jobs, nor will we be remembered like what he did. So I don't like the single image slide. I'll use them occasionally, but not all the time. So what do I recommend? It would be what I call the leave behind slides. And that's where you have maybe a powerful image. It could be entertaining, it could be informative, but it helps communicate your point. And then with it, you have a few bullets that get your point across. And usually the bullets are fairly short, just 5 to 7 words. And then your audience, when they look at your PowerPoint later, because you're going to leave it behind in an email or paper copy, whatever it is, you want them to remember your key points. Pardon me. Something else I'm prone to saying a lot is don't be a fire hose. So you want to be remembered, you want to get to the next meeting, but heaven forbid, you don't want to tell them everything. And this is particularly difficult for our technical presenters. So the engineers in the crowd, as an example, are in love with their solution. They worked on it for months and months and months. So they want to talk about it. Well, as you'll soon see, the investor is looking for a full portfolio of information, and the solution is actually a small part of it. So the metaphor I use is be a drinking fountain. Give them a taste, but just enough where you're kind of doing some progressive disclosure, and with the goal of getting to the next meeting. This takes practice to not overdo it. So it kind of begs the question, what do investors want? So here's our Shark Tank crew. All seem to have different motivations when you hear them on that show. By the way, virtually none of the entities that present on Shark Tank are startups. Virtually all are companies. They're in revenue and attempting to scale. So it begs a question, is it a beauty contest? So is the startup a participant in a beauty contest? This is colorized image from the 20s. Or is it an interrogation where there is a hard-headed investor asking piercing questions? I think it's a little bit of both, but from my experience, they mostly want facts. Okay. The investor, so you got this far, you got in front of them. So it sounds like you may meet the minimum criteria, but maybe not. So as an example, investors almost never invest in a startup with a single founder. So if this is your idea and you've been working on it for the last 2 years and you've done it all, you're too early. They're going to say, come back when you have a team with co-founders. Secondly, they're looking to invest in something that has some type of competitive advantage, whatever that is. Usually it's intellectual property. So you have a patent pending. It could be that your solution is defensible because of the rarity of what you're doing, but usually it's going to be IP. Viable business model. That means, how are you going to make money? How are you going to show that this business is going to jump to number 4 there? Scaling and fast growth. So if you're selling something that costs $1 and you're breaking even, uninterested. The investor wants to know that your revenue is going to far outscale costs and is going to grow at a rapid rate. And in fact, in that first 5 years, looking for a company that's going to grow at a rate of 35 to 50% a year, compound annual growth, that's a normal expectation. And that may not be enough to get their attention. So a nice little business that's going to provide the founder a nice living and maybe come up with some dividends every year. Not interested. That's not what these people are looking for. Also, they want to know that you're a good person, that you don't have a list of drunk driving expenses, and that you'll listen and be coachable. I don't know that's a word, coachable, but I think you get what it means, is that the investor is in. Now they want to have some influence, and they want you as the CEO or founder to listen to what they have to say and actually pivot when is necessary. Sometimes that's hard to do when it's your baby and you've been working on it for 2 years. So the investor wants to know that there's an exit plan. So think about it. Their return on investment only happens when there is a capital event, which I said earlier, which is an IPO, a merger, an acquisition, right? And so they don't invest in businesses that are long-term holds. That's not their ballgame. And in fact, Tech Coast Angels, which was, I think, started 22, 23 years ago, made some mistakes when they started their angel network. And they have some startups that they invested in that time that 22 years later are nice little companies with no plans to exit. So think about that. 22, 23 years waiting on a return on investment, that's a long time. So they're attempting to avoid that. And so with that investment, the founder, is selling a piece of the pie, is giving up some control to the investors. And that's simply factual, but also there's some awareness that the investors want to know that the founder gets it. And yeah, they'd like you to be captains of industry. They'd actually prefer you to have industry experience in the category that you're playing in. Now, sometimes that's hard. So if you think about Uber 15 years ago, that was uncharted territory, and these were very young and inexperienced founders. So someone really took a leap on them because they didn't really have any relevant experience. Oh yeah, the ability to pitch, the ability to sell is huge. And so if you're the CEO and you're uncomfortable in selling yourself, selling your concept, you got a problem with these guys, because they know that for you to be successful, you have to be able to very comfortably sell yourself in the business. And finally, they're always looking for traction. And that is proof that the dog will eat the dog food. Okay. And that is, you've talked with customers, you have letters of intent, you've made presentations, you have contracts in place, you've actually sold stuff. So that is a tipping point for most of the investors. So let me pause here for a second. Wow, this list is pretty specific, these 10 things, and there are others. And this is what's necessary for the investor to be interested to meet you again. And so it's very common that the startups who pitch can't check all these boxes, and they're not ready. They're not ready for that investor's money. So what does that mean? Well, you're going to have to come back later. And that's usually what they say. They say, hey, like what you're doing. We think that there's a growth opportunity here, but you're a little early for us. There's just not enough traction. We suggest you come back in 6 months or a year and give us an update. Now, is that a brush off? Yeah, it could be, because they say it a lot. But it's when we at Titan Angel say it, we mean it sincerely. So there are startups that are just too early for us to be interested in, but they have a welcome to come back later, and we have invested in some of those as well. So you're going to discover that each of these organizations that you pitch to have different formulas. I would say the traditional one is 15 minutes of presentation where the audience politely listens to you as you pitch typically your PowerPoint. And then you close the presentation and you go to Q&A. Sometimes it's 10 minutes. It just depends on the organization. So it's easy to practice the presentation. Is a little harder to really anticipate their questions and how you might answer them other than through experience. And so it's not unusual when you have a mature pitch and you're making it a lot, you're learning the questions, and then you become better at answering those questions. So there are a lot of opinions on what a pitch deck should look like. This is my take. I teach this in the classroom, and I'm welcome to see a number of my students here tonight. This is what I have done as someone who's pitched, and then as an investor, this is what I'm actually looking for. So let me go into a little more detail. It's just 12 slides. This is more art than it is science, but this is going to elicit the information that investors need to decide to go forward or not. So there's an introductory slide. You're basically saying hello. You got your company name, your logo. You say, hey, I'm JJ, and I'm here with Philip. And I like a one-sentence description. We're the Cal State Fullerton Startup Incubator, and we help early-stage startups. You got 30 seconds. That's not very much. But it's basically, as Adele would say, hello. From there, you need to nail the problem. So what are you trying to fix? What is out there? It could be an opportunity. Usually it's described as a problem statement. And so, what's out there? And give an example, give a specific. And in this particular case, you can have up to a minute, but you don't want to waste time. You need to go forward. Next, you go to the solution. So it's, as it sounds, it's how are you going to solve that problem? How are you going to make the pain go away, which is, of course, your opportunity? And then maybe you can take a few minutes and talk about some scenarios where your product, your service, your solution is going to make things better. It's going to take the pain away. You need to be very specific. From here, I would recommend you talk about it's the category, it's the marketplace, what's going on. So is this industry, is it growing? Is it shrinking? Is it flat? What's happening in that marketplace that allows you to wedge your way into it? And one of the things that I like is like an optimal customer persona. And you say, this is who we're selling to. This is what the person looks like. This is where they live. This is what they eat. This is how we can help them. A minute 30. This slide, not everybody likes in my community, and I call it why now. So essentially, prior to you coming on scene with this solution, everybody's getting along without you. Now, they may be purchasing a substitute, something that's not as good, but they're getting along without you. But there's something happening now, or there maybe should be, that says there's an opening in the marketplace today. And if we go forward and help these people, we're going to capture their business and get significant market share. So essentially, you're saying, hey, investors, get in now because this is the best time ever. Now, from there, usually there's a competitive slide, and that's where you're comparing your company with the other folks that are in the market. And what you'd like to have are a lot of check marks by you and a lot of empty cells for the others. So you're saying that, yeah, we have competition. Competition proves that there's a market. But you know what? We have the better solution. We have a solution that is different. And that's going to give us an edge in the marketplace. The single worst thing you could say would be we have no competition. Because of course you have competition. You have competition that is direct, that's doing virtually the same thing you're doing. You can have some indirect competition, and these are solutions that are maybe off to the side, but are still appealing to your customer. Business model, marketing. Business model is a fancy term of how you're going to make money, right? The revenue model is how you sell stuff. It could be at 7-Eleven, it could be on Amazon, it could be at the swap meet, This is a chance also to talk about your pricing, third-party validation. So do you have evidence that this is working? And who are these companies or customers that are becoming advocates for you or your disciples? And then finally, how are you going to go to market? Direct to consumer? Are you B2B? Are you going to use brokers? Whatever that is. And typically marketing is a fascinating subject to the angels. A lot of the folks in the room are marketing people. I'll digress and say some people are financial people and they have completely different needs. We'll get more to that. So we said before that traction's important. And so you want to demonstrate that your business is ready for them. Proof of concept, I'll repeat the term. Dog will eat the dog food. So it's one thing to say, I'm going to make dog food. It's another thing to get the doggies to eat it. So you want to provide them evidence that your solution works. You're going to say what your intellectual property status is. You have a provisional patent. You have engaged with an attorney. You have a patent pending. You have patent in hand, whatever that is. Product development, where are you? Is it, are you still in the early stages alpha? Are you doing customer evaluation with beta products, or have you released it? And then, by the way, who are your customers? So this one's only a minute. I might make this one a little longer. It's pretty dang important. Financial projections, must have. And in the classroom, I advocate 3 years. And one of the reasons is when you start going to years 4 and 5, it becomes like a work of fiction. Who knows what's going to happen in 4 or 5 years? But many investors want to hear a 5-year pitch, and you want to show year-over-year growth. You want to show how it can scale. In fact, let me show you what it looks like. It's something like this. Here's 3 years with a very simple breakout of a P&L, and years 4, 5, and 6 here, 20, 24, 25, 26. And you might give them some explanation that, in that first year, the founders take them salary. Oh yeah, in the first year, we're working out of our homes. And by the way, in the first year, the revenue really doesn't kick in to the third quarter. So that kind of explains the numbers themselves. Now, the controllers, the CFOs, the financial analysts in the room, they're frothing at the bit right now. This is insufficient information. Well, you've got all this information, but you can't begin to present it today in any detail. So there's an opportunity to meet with them again and talk in more depth. The management team, it is legend that investors would prefer a strong team with a mediocre idea versus the opposite. And so saying who you are, not just what you do, that you're the CEO, but why? What qualifies you to be the perfect CEO for this company and your co-founders as well? And this is a great time to actually have this slide to include your advisors. And I have seen startups get funded because they had a really sophisticated advisory board who bring the credibility that maybe the inexperienced founders don't have. Super important. And now we're getting close to the end of the presentation. This is called the ask slide, and it's saying, well, how much money are you looking for? By the way, have you got any money today? So this is the time to brag about how you invested your own money, right? What are you going to use the money for? If you're going to use it all for R&D, that could be a deal killer, because most investors want you to use the money to grow the company rather than to build the solution. So you got to be careful. And what are you willing to give to the investors? This is the valuation. So today, the pre-money valuation of our company is $4 million based upon the progress of the past 2 years. We're looking to offer an investment of 10% in our company and we're looking for $750,000. So you've just said the current valuation, the post-money valuation. Now, what's it going to be worth in 5 years, 7 years? You could do a guess, but the investors are going to be breaking out their calculators trying to figure it out. So the conclusion of that story is the happy ending. What's your exit strategy? Do you see yourself being acquired? And if so, by what brand name company? Now, is that a fantasy? A little bit, but the investors want to hear a happy story. And then we're now at the summary page. And so it should be about 14 of the 15 minutes. And here you repeat 2 or 3 things that you want them to remember. And then you close and you say, and that concludes my presentation. I'd love to take your questions. So you have completed that. We go on to the Q&A, and suddenly the dynamic flips. The investors now become very vocal. Sometimes they can be a little aggressive, and you just have to welcome that energy. By the way, I got a hot tip for you. So you just concluded the PowerPoint. The PowerPoint is still up, but you've got something in your hip pocket, and that is more slides. So if somebody comes back and says, hey, JJ, I don't get it. Tell me more about that problem. Well, this is where you say, oh, well, thanks very much for that question. Let me explain that in more detail. Then you go to a slide that has even more detail on the problem. And that applies for virtually any of your presentation elements. And it makes you look so flippin' smart that you have all their questions prepared with these answers. So anyway, highly recommend that you do that. So Titan Angels LLC has been around about 6 years. You can visit us at titanangels.com. We're always looking for new startups, but we're kind of picky, right? Because we want to invest $1 and get $20 back in 5 to 7 years. So you better have your A game on when you come see us. That's my contact information, my horse, George, and buy my books, and you can email me or you can call me.